It had been 3 weeks since Cato's downfall, but the echoes of his reign still lingered in every corner of Nurutech. Amara, now the acting CEO, walked into the same boardroom where she had once been publicly humiliated. The air felt lighter now, but the memory of that day still stung. She looked around the room, the polished table, the glass walls, the same faces that once doubted her, and took a deep breath. The company was thriving again, numbers up, morale steady, but she could feel it in her chest. Rebuilding trust was going to take more than good reports and calm speeches. Outside those walls, the rumors had started. People whispered that Cato was back in Lagos. Some said he'd been spotted meeting with investors from Dynatech Global, Nurutech's fiercest rival. Others said he was planning something big, something personal. Tessa, her most loyal ally, didn't believe in coincidences. People like him don't lose quietly, she said one evening, leaning against Amara's desk. Amara gave a small, steady smile. Then we'll rise quietly, she replied. But that night, when the office lights had dimmed and the city hummed below her window, Amara's phone buzzed. A new email appeared. No sender name, no signature. Just a single line in the subject. You took my throne. Now I'll take everything. Her stomach tightened. She stared at the screen for a long moment, the glow reflecting in her eyes. Cato was back, and the war had just begun. The morning started like any other at Nurutech. Employees moved through the glass doors, coffee in hand, screens flickering with updates from overnight projects. But in the security room, one guard froze as he watched the live feed. A familiar figure had just walked into the lobby, tall, confident, wearing his signature dark suit and that same calm smirk. Cato Mbeal. No one had seen him in months. Since his fall, people assumed he had disappeared for good. Yet here he was, walking through Nurutech's front doors as if he still owned the place. He didn't head toward Amara's office. Instead, he slipped into a side corridor and made his way to one of the smaller meeting rooms, the kind reserved for quiet, off-record talks. Within minutes, a few of his old allies from the executive team joined him. The same people who had once cheered his leadership now looked uneasy, but Cato's charm still carried weight. He placed a thick envelope on the table, sliding it toward them. She thinks she's in control, he said, his voice low and sharp. Let's show her how fragile power really is. His words hung in the air like smoke. Promises of money, influence, and restored positions followed. Some hesitated, but greed has a way of blurring old loyalties. That afternoon, Tessa, working late in the IT department, noticed something odd. A data transfer request had popped up, one that didn't belong to any authorized project. It looked routine at first glance, but the destination address caught her attention, a secure server tied to Dynatech Global. Her instincts kicked in. She immediately halted the process and began tracing the source. The deeper she dug, the clearer it became. Someone inside Nurutech was trying to send confidential data to their biggest rival. She rushed to Amara's office, bursting through the door. You need to see this, she said, placing her laptop on the desk. Amara leaned over, eyes scanning the screen. The evidence was undeniable. Someone was planting seeds of sabotage from within. Amara sat back, calm but tense. He's not even hiding anymore, she murmured. Tessa nodded. He's testing us, seeing how far he can go before we react. For a moment, the two women sat in silence, the hum of the city outside filling the space. Amara's face hardened with quiet resolve. Then we don't react, she said finally. We prepare. Down in the parking garage, Cato stepped into his black car, the city lights reflecting off its hood. He looked up toward the top floor of Nurutech's building, toward Amara's office, and smiled faintly. The message had been sent. The lines had been drawn. And though no one outside those walls knew it yet, the war for Nurutech's soul had already begun. Amara was halfway through her morning briefing when her assistant burst in, pale and shaking. You need to come to the boardroom. Now. Within minutes, Amara stepped into chaos. The room buzzed with panic, phones ringing, voices overlapping, faces tight with fear. On the big screen, headlines were already spreading across the web. Nurutech data leak, sensitive files exposed. Amara's stomach dropped. Dozens of confidential client files were online, contracts, personal data, private communications. Years of trust gone in a single blow. What's the source? She asked, trying to steady her voice. One of the board members slid a printed report toward her. According to an anonymous whistleblower, you authorized the transfer. They claim you orchestrated the breach. The room fell silent. Amara looked up slowly, disbelief flashing across her face. That's ridiculous, she said. Why would I destroy my own company? But the board wasn't calm. Voices rose again. Talk of investor panic, legal exposure, public backlash. Someone mentioned the word resignation. Another mentioned damage control. The air was suffocating. Amara stayed quiet for a moment, forcing herself to breathe. We don't panic, she said firmly. We investigate. While the board scrambled to contain the fallout, Tessa locked herself in the server room with her laptop. Hours passed. Coffee cups piled up beside her as lines of code and digital trails filled her screen. Then she saw it, a string of hidden activity logs pointing to an outside intrusion. The signature was faint but familiar. A name buried deep in the metadata, K. Beale. She ran to Amara's office. "I found it," she said, breathless. "He did this. Cato. He planted everything to make it look like you were behind it." Amara leaned forward, scanning the evidence. Her jaw tightened. It was all there, Cato's digital fingerprints, encrypted traces of his old credentials. But proving it publicly would take time. The logs needed to be authenticated, cross-verified, and carefully presented. One wrong move, and it would look like she was just trying to shift blame. Meanwhile, news channels were already circling. Shareholders were calling nonstop. A few investors had even hinted they might pull out if the scandal grew. The weight pressed heavy on her shoulders, but she didn't flinch. Finally, she stood, looking out the window at the city skyline glowing in the dusk. Her reflection stared back, calm, focused, unbroken. "If he wants a fight," she said quietly, "he'll get one." She turned toward Tessa and added, "But on my terms." That night, while most of the city slept, Amara stayed in her office, the hum of the servers filling the silence. She wasn't just cleaning up a crisis, she was setting the stage for a reckoning. Cato had made his move. Now it was her turn. 2 nights after the data leak, Amara sat with Tessa in the quiet glow of her office. The city lights flickered outside, but inside the tension was sharp. They both knew Cato wouldn't stop, not until Nurutech was in ruins. But this time, Amara wasn't going to defend. She was going to strike. "We can't just prove he did it," she said, tapping her pen against the desk. "We have to make him expose himself." Tessa leaned forward, a spark in her eyes. "A trap?" Amara nodded, something too tempting for him to resist. That night, the plan was born. They would create a digital decoy project, a fake government proposal filled with impressive but believable detail. The file would describe a multi-million-dollar technology deal between Nurutech and the Ministry of Innovation, something any rival would kill to get their hands on. They named it Project Falcon. For days, Tessa and her small trusted team worked in secret, building the document. Every paragraph sounded authentic, every chart and signature looked real. But hidden deep inside the file were tiny digital trackers, invisible to the eye, impossible to remove, that would trace every device, every server, every person who opened it. Once it was ready, they intentionally leaked the file through a controlled channel, a private email thread known to have spies. Then they waited. 48 hours later, Tessa's screen lit up. The trap had worked. Someone from Dynatech Global had downloaded the file. The trackers activated, pinging locations and server IDs. One name appeared again and again, Cato Beale. In a sleek glass office across town, Cato was grinning. He stood before Dynatech's board, presenting the exclusive government proposal as his next big innovation. "This," he declared confidently, "will put Dynatech years ahead of Nurutech." The executives leaned forward, impressed. They had no idea the file in his hand was poison. Back at Nurutech, Tessa watched the data unfold on her monitor. Lines of code tracing directly to Cato's personal system, then branching to Dynatech's main servers. Every click, every download, every forwarded email was being logged in real time. Amara stood behind her, arms crossed, silent but fierce. "He took the bait," Tessa said softly. Amara's lips curved into a calm smile. "Good. Now he'll bury himself." The next morning, news spread quickly inside Dynatech. Cato was already bragging about his breakthrough. He had no idea that the very document he was flaunting contained his downfall, proof that he was still stealing from the company he once tried to destroy. Amara didn't rush to expose him yet. She wanted the evidence to grow stronger, undeniable. For the first time in weeks, she felt in control again. The game had changed, and this time, she was the one setting the rules. The press conference room at Nurutech was packed. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and the air buzzed with curiosity. Amara stood at the podium, calm and poised, dressed in a simple navy suit. Her expression gave nothing away, but everyone could feel it. Something big was about to happen. For days, the business world had been buzzing about Dynatech Global's groundbreaking government proposal. It was supposed to be a major step forward for them, a sign they were outpacing Nurutech. But Amara knew the truth. The proposal they proudly presented was a stolen file, the decoy she and Tessa had crafted down to the last fake signature. And now, it was time to reveal the truth. She adjusted the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady. "Today, Nurutech wishes to clarify recent reports surrounding a certain government project." The room went silent. Amara continued. "The proposal presented by Dynatech Global last week was, in fact, created inside Nurutech, as part of a confidential internal file. What Dynatech failed to realize," she paused, letting her words sink in, is that the document they stole was embedded with traceable data. Gasps filled the room. Behind her, the big screen lit up with a slideshow, timestamps, digital signatures, IP addresses. Each image was sharp, undeniable. Every log pointed to one name, Cato Beale. Reporters leaned forward, cameras clicking furiously. As you can see, Amara said, the digital trail confirms unauthorized access from Dynatech's internal servers and Mr. Beale's personal account. We will be pursuing legal action for corporate espionage. Across the city, in his sleek office, Cato watched the live broadcast on his laptop. His face tightened as the evidence rolled across the screen, his own credentials exposed in front of the entire industry. When Amara spoke his name, he slammed his fist on the desk. The laptop crashed to the floor. His team looked away, terrified. Back at the press conference, questions erupted from every corner. Did you know about the breach? Will Dynatech respond? What happens to Mr. Beale now? Amara held up her hand, calm and firm. Our priority is protecting innovation and integrity. This company was built on trust, and today we defend that trust. Dynatech's CEO, sitting at the back of the room, looked pale. He tried to leave quietly, but reporters surrounded him, shouting questions about the scandal. The live feed caught it all, his panic, his silence, his downfall. As the conference ended, Amara stepped away from the podium. The crowd's voices blended into a blur of noise. She walked backstage where Tessa was waiting, watching the chaos unfold on a monitor. Tessa smiled faintly and whispered, "Round 2 goes to us." Amara allowed herself a small, tired smile. Let's make sure there isn't a round 3. And with that, she turned off the screen, leaving Cato's empire of lies to crumble in public view. The victory from the press conference didn't last long. Just when it seemed like Nurutech was back on steady ground, the internet caught fire again, this time with something far more personal. Early that morning, Amara's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. At first, she ignored it, thinking it was the usual flood of messages after a big media moment. But when she finally opened her feed, her breath caught. Dozens of private photos, moments from her personal life, harmless but intimate, were plastered all over social media. Alongside them were captions and fake stories, twisting her image into something ugly. The headlines were cruel. Is Nurutech's CEO unfit to lead? Inside Amara's scandal, it was Cato's next move, not an attack on the company this time, but on her dignity. Within hours, the internet went wild. Hashtags trended, gossip shows dissected her every photo, and critics called for her resignation. Even a few board members started to panic, worried that public trust would crumble again. Amara locked herself in her office, staring at the screen, feeling her world shrink. For the first time in weeks, she let herself cry. The humiliation stung deeper than any corporate betrayal. Tessa tried to console her, but Amara barely spoke. He doesn't just want my company, she whispered. He wants me to disappear. That evening, her doorbell rang. Mrs. Adewale, her former mentor and one of the wisest women in the industry, stood at the door, holding a bag of tea and her familiar calm smile. She sat across from Amara, studying her tear-stained face. My dear, she began gently, power will always attract dirt. The higher you rise, the more they'll dig. But how you clean it, that's what defines your legacy. Amara looked down, her voice breaking. They've seen everything. They've twisted everything. How do I come back from that? Mrs. Adewale reached for her hand. You don't come back. You rise forward. You show them that what they meant for shame will become your strength. People forget gossip, but they remember grace. Those words settled deep in Amara's heart. She sat there for a long moment, breathing slowly, her mind clearing like a storm finally passing. Then she wiped her tears and straightened her shoulders. You're right, she said quietly but firmly. If he wants to drag me through the dirt, I'll show him how clean I can fight. Mrs. Adewale smiled. That's my girl. The next morning, Amara walked into the Nurutech building with her head high. Her photos were still everywhere online, but she didn't flinch. The whispers didn't matter anymore. She had work to do, not to defend herself, but to rebuild what mattered. Let's clean house, she told Tessa. And just like that, Amara moved from victim to fighter, ready to face whatever came next. The boardroom was tense, thick with whispers and uneasy glances. It was déjà vu, the same long table, the same faces, but a very different reason for meeting. This time, the future of Nurutech's leadership was on the line. Amara stood outside the glass doors for a moment, collecting herself. Inside, she could hear the low rumble of voices debating, her name echoing between them. The agenda was clear. Decide whether she should remain CEO after the bad publicity surrounding her leaked photos. It didn't matter that Cato was behind it. In the world of business, perception could be deadlier than truth. When she finally walked in, the room fell silent. Every eye turned to her, waiting for a reaction. But Amara's expression was calm, almost unreadable. She wore confidence like armor. The chairman cleared his throat. Ms. Okoro, he began carefully. This meeting has been called to discuss the recent damage to Nuruteka's image. Some members believe your continued leadership could hurt investor confidence? Amara finished for him, her tone polite but firm. Yes, I've heard. Across the table, a few board members shifted uncomfortably. Among them were the same people who had once sided with Cato, and now they were leading the call for her removal. Amara placed a sealed envelope on the table. Before we continue, I'd like to submit something for the record. She opened it slowly and spread several printed documents in front of them: bank records, message logs, and signed correspondence. These are payment receipts, she said calmly, showing that certain members of this board have been receiving funds from a Dynatech account, specifically from Cato Mbeel's private channel. A heavy silence filled the room. One of the accused executives went pale. Another tried to speak but couldn't find the words. Amara continued, her voice steady. These same individuals are the ones calling for my removal. I'll let the evidence speak for itself. Mrs. Adewale, who sat at the far end of the table as an advisor, leaned forward and smiled faintly. Well, she said, breaking the tension, I think that settles it. Meeting adjourned. CEO remains. The relief in the room was almost audible, at least from those who still had integrity. The others sat frozen, exposed and defeated. Amara gathered her papers and stood, her composure unshaken. Before leaving, she looked around the table, meeting every gaze. I don't fear storms anymore, she said quietly. I build from them. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mrs. Adewale nodded, pride glinting in her eyes. As Amara walked out of the room, the weight that had followed her for weeks began to lift. The whispers faded behind her. She had faced humiliation, betrayal, and sabotage, and still she stood taller than before. Cato had tried to break her spirit, but instead he had forged her power. The storm finally turned in Amara's favor. Within days of the press conference and the boardroom showdown, the world began to shift. Dynatech Global, once seen as a rising giant, was now drowning in scandal. The government launched a full investigation into Cato Mbeel and his company for corporate theft, data breaches, and insider corruption. Headlines spread across every major outlet, Dynatech under fire. Leaked evidence ties ex-CEO Cato Mbeel to espionage. As the news broke, Nuruteka's stock shot up almost overnight. Investors who had once doubted Amara suddenly wanted meetings. Partners who had paused deals were now eager to sign again. For the first time in months, the company's offices felt alive. Laughter in the hallways, renewed confidence, the sound of people believing again. Amara didn't waste a moment celebrating. Instead, she turned her focus forward. She announced a new phase for Nurutech, one that would expand across East Africa, building partnerships centered on ethical technology and innovation. She launched initiatives to support young entrepreneurs and created programs for women-led startups. Her vision wasn't about power anymore, it was about purpose. Reporters began calling her the CEO who fights with grace. Every interview she gave carried the same message: integrity, resilience, and leadership that lifts others instead of stepping on them. She didn't mention Cato's name once. She didn't need to. His story had already become its own cautionary tale. Meanwhile, in Ghana, Cato lived like a shadow of his former self. He moved between rented apartments, paranoid that someone was following him. His phone calls went unanswered, his bank accounts frozen. Dynatech's board had removed him quietly, blaming him for the company's collapse. The empire he once ruled had crumbled, leaving only regret and anger behind. He watched the news sometimes, Amara smiling at tech summits, shaking hands with presidents, launching innovation hubs for young women. Each image burned him, but deep down, he knew she had won not just the battle, but the legacy. Back in Lagos, Amara stood on the top floor of Nuruteka's new headquarters, looking out over the city lights. Tessa walked in, holding the latest report: record profits, new partnerships, global recognition. You did it, Tessa said softly. Amara smiled, her gaze still fixed on the skyline. No, she said. We did. Then she turned away from the window and walked back to her desk, where a framed photo of her early Nurutech team sat. The faces of those who had stood by her through the chaos reminded her what real victory looked like. Cato's name was never spoken in her meetings again. She had moved on, not because she forgot, but because she no longer needed revenge. What she built was louder than anything he destroyed. Months passed, and the scars of the past finally began to fade. Nurutech wasn't just surviving anymore, it was thriving. The company had grown beyond Lagos, with offices across Africa and a reputation built on innovation, integrity, and second chances. On a bright morning in Nairobi, the air buzzed with excitement. A crowd gathered in front of a sleek new glass building, Nurutech's newest campus. The sign above the entrance shimmered in the sunlight: Nurutech Innovation Hub, Nairobi. This was more than just an expansion, it was a statement. The company was investing in the future, in young minds, in Africa's talent, and in hope. Amara stood at the podium, her expression calm but proud. Behind her were banners that read "Empowering the Next Generation." The audience was filled with journalists, local officials, and hundreds of young graduates who would soon call this place their workplace. Cameras clicked as she prepared to cut the ribbon. Tessa stood beside her, unable to hide her smile. She looked at Amara, the woman who had once been betrayed, humiliated, and underestimated, now standing at the peak of her power. "From fired to CEO," Tessa said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. Amara turned to her, smiling. "From secretary to partner." They both laughed softly, remembering how far they'd come, from late nights cleaning up Cato's messes to rebuilding an empire together. Their friendship had become the foundation of Nuruteka's new era. It wasn't built on titles or ambition, but on loyalty, courage, and trust. After the ribbon was cut, cheers erupted from the crowd. The young employees rushed inside, eyes wide with excitement. The new campus was everything Amara had dreamed of: open workspaces, research labs, mentorship centers, and a massive hall for innovation challenge. Each floor had murals celebrating African inventors and entrepreneurs. Every corner carried the same message: your ideas matter. Later that afternoon, as the crowd thinned, Amara and Tessa walked through the campus together. They stopped by a glass wall overlooking the Nairobi skyline. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" Tessa asked. Amara nodded, her gaze soft. "Every day. But I also know it couldn't have ended any other way." Tessa smiled. "You could have left. You could have walked away when it got ugly." Amara looked out at the students below, laughing and taking photos in their new offices. "And miss this?" she said quietly. "No. We were meant to build something that outlived the chaos." As the sun set over the city, the two women stood side by side, not just as colleagues, but as survivors who had turned pain into power. Nuruteka had risen from the ashes, and so had they. The cameras caught one last photo of them smiling together, framed by the golden Nairobi light. Two women who proved that resilience isn't loud, it simply endures. The stage lights glowed softly as Amara stepped up to the podium. The room was filled with the world's top tech leaders, journalists, and innovators. The giant screen behind her read, "Global Tech Summit, the Future of Leadership." Cameras focused on her calm, confident face as the crowd quieted down. She looked around the hall, took a breath, and began to speak. "When I first started in this industry," she said, her voice steady and warm, "I thought leadership was about being the smartest, the fastest, the strongest. I thought power meant winning." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But I was wrong. True leadership isn't about climbing. It's about lifting others as you rise." The audience erupted in applause. Some stood cheering. Others nodded with admiration. It wasn't just a speech, it was a moment of truth. Amara didn't speak like a CEO defending a title. She spoke like a woman who had survived the fire and come out stronger, with her integrity intact. When the applause finally settled, she smiled, thanked the crowd, and stepped off the stage. Backstage, her team greeted her with hugs and congratulations, but she moved quietly toward a corner, needing a second to breathe. That's when her phone buzzed. A single message appeared on the screen from an unknown number. "I'm proud of you. TM." She stared at it for a moment, her heart still. "Cato." Instead of anger or nostalgia, a faint smile crossed her lips. She deleted the message without hesitation, slipped the phone into her pocket, and walked toward the exit. Outside, the light was bright, the air calm. Amara stepped forward, her shadow long behind her. The story of Amara and Cato had never really been about betrayal. It had always been about transformation.